Hi everyone. Sorry for a little delay here, some technical difficulties for us, and we're all welcoming you here for our North Sales webinar uh, for Southern Straits race. It's going to be hosted by West Vancouver Yacht Club this year on April 3rd, 5th. We got our presenters here tonight. Here we go. We got me, I'm Alex Levkovskiy. I work with Vancouver Loft. We have Ross MacDonald here, also working from Vancouver and North Sales, Victoria, and Stuart Dahlgren. We all happy to be here to share our knowledge and expertise on a race, sale inventory, and all the tips and tricks that might be useful for you guys during the race. Now I'm going to pass it on here to Ross for the opening slides of our presentation, do a quick overview of the race and historical weather patterns, tides, and all the weather factors that might be involved in a successful race for you and your team. This year, we got a few different course selections, with the longest course going up to the Sister Islands and back, totaling up 100 nautical miles. Entrance Island course going to Andros Island, White Islands, back, and a Halibut Bank course, including one inshore day course for smaller boats. We will be racing using two rating systems, being ORC and PHRF, which is two quite different systems. One ORC involves a bit of more technical metrics to it, with putting in account your stability tests, sail sizes, and the actual offset files of your hull and the boat in general. And a PHRF system is a little bit more numbers driven in terms of sail areas and seconds per mile. And here in the Northwest, we have slightly different system. One is in a PHRF Northwest and PHRF BC, but they correlate pretty well for the most part of it. Um, we really wanted to touch base on the historical weather patterns here for the months of April. And as you can see here, we mostly anticipating to see westerly and easterly winds in a quite different ranges here. For the most part, for the 75% of the months, we can expect winds up of a 10 miles per hour, going for 50 to 60%, 15 plus, and moving in at 25 and higher for 25% of the months. So on average, the April is pretty windy months, giving us a good telltale sign that we are most likely going to be racing in a quite strong breeze. Also, the weather systems are going to be playing a huge factor in it, and the fronts going through the Pacific Northwest. But overall, going through this data from the Halibut Bank, including Balinas Island and Sisters Islands, we're setting up for quite a big windward-leeward course in this regard, um, giving you a good understanding that potentially you will be looking at a good selection of jibs depending on the forecast on a day of the race, and a good kite inventory, which is later in the presentation, we're going to talk about it, might have a strong potential for you to review what you carry on your ORC certificate, especially PHRF is less dependent on that, but what sales you carry on the ORC certificates, because code sales and code 75s and less, they might be coming in into play a little bit less than normally it would in a coastal racing. Stuart, do you have anything to add to the slides here?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is if you actually just pan back to the first one with the course layouts, um, you kind of, I always think my traditional sense of this race is even when I'm on the Sisters Island courses that I'm going north. But really, the reality when you actually look at the course geometry is you're really racing west more than north. And so that can kind of influence your thinking as far as your progress that you're actually making up the course and your relative heading. Because you're really, you're looking for that 275, 280 course to make 100% VMG towards Sisters and Sangsters Island. And I think that's relevant when you scroll through those wind barbs to the next couple slides, because you look at, Halibut Bank, where, it's really in more of an east-west orientation, which is, kind of aligned with the course. And then as you scroll through to Bolinas, um, especially the southerly, which is going to be coming, up from Puget Sound and south, is going to be in that real east southeast direction, and still quite a bit more westerly in Bolinas, and that has to do with as the pressure comes through the hill, the gaps in the hills, et cetera, and the Qualicum winds. And then when you step forward to Sisters, um, you'll notice. Just go one more slide forward, Alex. um, it starts to align with how the strait changes direction up there a little bit, and you get more of these northwesterly breezes, which are now coming, truly over the top of the island and through Johnstone Strait, et cetera. And just one other comment about on these, when you're looking at it, it's percent of windy days per month. So it's not saying that 70% or like 25% of all time in April is blowing greater than 25 miles per hour. It's saying that 25% of days will experience winds at some point in the day of greater than 25 miles per hour. Now, it's still a fairly like high percentile factor as far as like distribution. And it gets increasingly windier as you go north. So that's kind of really what these slides show.
Okay, perfect, Stuart. Good stuff. And maybe while we're back at it here at a course layout, we probably want to really touch base on the tides and how tides are impacting your course strategy and some tactical decisions, especially getting out from the English Bay and the Narrows. Stuart, do you want to talk about that, about how your ebbing or flooding tide can impact how you're going to be getting out of the bay, and what is strategies you've been historically using or tips you would like to share with the rest of us?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big challenges, and I haven't actually looked at this year's, but typically just because it's always timed on Easter, we're kind of into a fairly um, similar-ish tide cycle. And so, the race is typically started on an ebb tide, or very near the beginning of the ebb tide. So you have pretty significant flow coming out of First Narrows. And, that kind of goes out into English Bay and fans out a bit. And there are, significant rivers and back eddies to be aware of. I think the challenge typically in the straight start is that some people get very locked into predetermining their strategy entirely about by current, because that is a kind of, they can look at a book and a current model and come with the predetermined strategy a little bit earlier, a little bit more easily. But pressure on the water tends to be an extremely important element too, right? So balancing those two factors is pretty critical, and like what sets you up for the next thing, right? I think that early step out and away from Dunderave Pier, on average, if the ebb is happening, typically pays. Um, but a couple boats got quite handsomely rewarded for digging way into the North Shore last year, and you'll see that strategy taken by a couple boats almost every year, and it's mixed success. And I don't actually have a good equation as to like when that really is beneficial versus the other times where it doesn't seem to be quite as effective. Looks like Ross has managed to unmute himself. You got any comments on that, Ross?
Yeah, I think the current, if it's ebbing, and it's pushing us all across the starting line, no matter if it's an easterly or a westerly, the biggest push is sort of in that first few miles after the Lionsgate Bridge, and then it generally sort of spreads reasonably evenly across the course. And so maybe as you get halfway towards Point Atkinson, like you say, it's a little bit more about pressure and shifts and making sure you just don't get too close to shore where you do get the benefit of the ebb tide. And then as soon as you get beyond Point Atkinson, there's a different dynamic with the current because it's ebbing out of Howe Sound, which means it's going from north to south. And then in the strait in general, it's sort of ebbing towards Victoria. It's going southwards. So for me personally, I like to take advantage of that ebb. If it's a westerly, it's a long port tack after Point Atkinson and sort of picking your spot to get across towards Bowen Island where it's not going to get too light, but you're going to get a bit of that ebb on the leeward side. And it generally there's a bit of a wind bend in there as well as a westerly comes down the strait, it kind of bends into Howe Sound and is more of a southwesterly there. So you get a long lifted port tack towards Bowen Island. You get the benefit of the current that's pushing southwards, and that current also goes up Bowen Island to sort of the north, maybe not quite the southwest corner of Bowen Island, but it goes maybe halfway along the southernmost shore. So that's a fairly safe strategy current wise and wind wise in a westerly, but there's the odd risk of the wind lifting over the mountains of Bowen Island because it's a pretty high mountain. So you have to be a little bit careful of that, especially if the westerly is not really a westerly, it's more from the southwest. It could just lift up and over Bowen Island and as we call the Bowen Hole. So you have to be a little bit careful of that. Yeah, that's sort of the first 5 or 6 miles dealt with, but yeah, it gets more interesting after that.
I think that Bowen Hole is impacted a bit by like sky condition too, right, Ross? Would you like it's kind of similar to Fulford or Fermanagh, where it's one of these south-facing, sloping hillsides. So, even at that time of year, if it's been sunny all morning, it's got quite a bit of like thermal lift. So it's really lifting the breeze off the water there. So like you kind of get a bit of like you're getting suction into Howe Sound, but you're getting lift off of those southern hillsides, which are like exposed to the early day sun, right?
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. Good stuff. And Ross, would you like to touch base on how normally, for the most part, west and northwest progressing up the course as people are heading towards the sister islands? Do you have any comments on that or would like to share some information with us?
Yeah, I think, the Westerly generally plays out the way Stuart was saying that, the general trend as you get further north is the wind is a little bit more northwest as opposed to west. But, the caveat in that is, if it gets late in the day and we've been going upwind most of the day, you could see a qualicum sort of in that last sort of 6, 8 miles before Sisters Island, and as it's coming through the valleys there, and there's the best way to see if you're going to have a chance of that is if the gradient offshore, on the west side of Vancouver Island is more from the south or southwest, and so it looks like a normal northwesterly in the Strait of Georgia, but it could, as it dies off later in the day, be overtaken by that qualicum. So, which means, you might be banking on a right shift, but it could end up being a big left shift and it could be a reach back and forth, maybe not all the way back and forth to Bolinas, but a long part of that journey could be a bit of a fetch. So that would be the thing to look out for me would be, what is the actual gradient wind when we look at the, Strait of Georgia winds versus what's the big picture is offshore, just to see if there is a chance of maybe a qualicum pushing through, especially later in the day or even in the early evening.
Okay, this is great. And we got some resources here. If you guys want to dig in a little bit more, uh, feel free to use this QR code. You could definitely, or forward this link to your friends and share it. It's a good information on what is going on in the Strait of Georgia. And Stuart and Ross shared this book with us. Amazing book about how weather is behaving in the Strait of Georgia. Um, it's pretty hard to find these days and pretty hard to find a copy of this book, but if you do get a chance, get it. It's a really good source of information.
Yeah, I mean, it was technically rewritten into that reference document that we had the link to on the previous page. And so the meteorologist who wrote this book collaborated with some others, and then that's available for free for as a PDF download on the Government of Canada weather website that link will take you to. And it's a good read. And there's a section on Strait of Georgia that, you know, kind of specifically talks about some of the stuff that Ross and I were talking about as far as, you know, what are the gradients to watch out for. If you see a pressure difference between sea Scheldt and Tofino or Ucluelet, you know, you're likely to see a qualicum. You know, it explains some of that stuff in a way that you'll never um, really be able to absorb from an app, you know, and the pretty shaded pictures with the flowy wind barbs. And, you know, it allows you to kind of understand it at a deeper level and watch for cloud formations and kind of check some of those local pressure gradient differences and, you know, have a better understanding of what happens next in a typical um, thing, because a lot of those models don't actually model things like the Alberni Inlet or you know, Howe Sound, or, you know, and so they're, you know, most of them are poor enough resolution that they don't capture those things. And, you know, as you say, it can make a big difference, right? You get up to qualicum, and if you've been sailing downwind in the southerly and a qualicum wind comes in, you know, it can be quite a nasty transition over by Levkovskiy and Sangster Islands. And you know, I've seen boats come from way behind, transition into the qualicum and reach over the top of boats that were a couple miles ahead, and they just beam reach all the way to Sisters and back to Bolinas. While, you know, in a very extreme case, boats are almost still sitting at Sangster, right, just stuck between the southerly and the qualicum, right? But yeah, so good read, worth reading. And if you can
Yeah.
find this book, it's been out of publication for about 20 years, so it's getting hard to find. We found one copy on Amazon for $900.
Yeah, and they had only one in stock, so if you want to get it, go get it now. All right. No, it's all good stuff, guys, and we're gonna jump here and uh, ORC system, and Stuart is gonna walk us through and share his vision of it and share tips and tricks how you can read the system and how you can make the system work in your favor.
Yeah, so I mean, ORC, in and of its nature, you know, no rating system is perfect. I'm a big believer in it because uh, it actively and deliberately tries to rate all boats fairly, you know, and doesn't, you know, IRC and some of the other rules that exist elsewhere, you know, currently or in the past, you know, have had a goal of trying to create a certain kind of type of boat, quote unquote, type forming, where you see, you know, like IOR boats of various generations all kind of look very similar to each other, and then IMS boats kind of look very similar, and, you know, IRC boats for a long period looked very similar. They've diverged a bit now, and I think that rule has become a bit more dynamic. But that's one of the really, you know, I think good things about RC is you can take a centerboard Swan 48 from 46 from, you know, 40 years ago, and you know, have a surprisingly close rating with much more modern boats of different just dynamics. And so some of the ways they achieve that is they use a velocity prediction program, which creates a hydrodynamic and aerodynamic model of the sails and the hull, and kind of tries to understand how the boat's going to move through the water, and then, you know, how different sail sizes and aspect ratios and configurations are going to affect the boat's performance. As a result of that, you end up with a fairly complicated certificate, which has a whole bunch of ratings on it. So most of us are pretty familiar and comfortable with our PHRF certificates, which have, you know, a single number, and that applies in all wind ranges and all course conditions. ORC understands that certain boats will have very different performance curves in different conditions. and attempts to neutralize that. And that's kind of become more critical as time has gone on with yacht design, because when boats were all displacement boats, they had pretty linear performance curves, right? It was this long, it weighed this much, it had this much sail area. It was on a pretty predictable and static curve at how much faster the boat was going to get at various points of sail and wind strengths. And it was relatively even across the wind range. As soon as we get to even as long ago as Cal 40s, where you have boats that kind of start really surfing and breaking free downwind and ocean conditions, you get this exponential speed jump in certain conditions. And that becomes really hard to rate against boats that don't do that. And that's kind of one of the benefits of ORC, is that it attempts to do that. Now, there's a bunch of challenges, et cetera, that have to happen with the race committee to pick the correct number. And, there'll always be someone who's unhappy about it. But, generally speaking, the quality of the rule in the VPP is quite good. So some of the key points is you'll see the term international versus a club certificate turned around. So international certificate is more expensive and harder to get. It requires more measurements, more oversight on the measurements, requires the mast come out of the boat and be weighed and its center of gravity be determined. It requires a full inclining of the boat to test its stability as it relates to different weights at different heel angles. And a club rating is almost as easy to get as a PHRF rating if you basically have the sail sizes and there's a sister ship somewhere in the ORC database. So i.e. anything that's like a pretty common J boat or production cruising boat of any sort kind of has what they call a hull file. So that allows them to be, you can use that hull file and they assume, but the thing that happens with a club certificate versus an international certificate is assumptions are made against you. So if you apply for a club certificate and there are 5 J120s in the database, your club rating is basically assumed that you're going to be the lightest one. If there are several different boats with international certificates and one of them has a lighter mast than the other ones, it's going to be assumed that you have the lighter mast. So, having a club rating assumes some things not in your favor. And, I've been through that and had the process of initially having a boat measured for club and then remeasuring it for international and finding there were pretty significant differences to the mast weight and the mast center of gravity in real life versus what was assumed by the club certificate. And so that has the net effect, because the rule is relatively stability sensitive, of having a reasonably large impact on the rating. So that's something to consider if you're serious and you're spending time, money, energy, or if you have your mast out of your boat for any other reason, and you don't have an international certificate. That's a really easy key step to do. So that's one part. The other part here that's kind of interesting is that they have a polars and speed guide. So that's a very easy thing. Once you have a certificate, you can go onto the ORC Sailor Services and download your polars and speed guide. These are useful tools that I will not say. Typically, the polars are not as refined as your performance polars that you would build if you were collecting data and log files and reviewing your information. You would be able to develop higher resolution, more detailed, more accurate polars. But they're a good thing to use for a little bit, because when you sail against your ORC polars, you're sailing against what the rule assumes you should be doing at a given wind speed, angle, and strength. And so if you can regularly exceed those, that means you're probably relatively well optimized to the rule, because you're now, you're going faster than the rule thinks you should be going. If you're way off of your ORC polars that are generated from the rule, then you're performing under your rating. And so, in PHRF, we would say our rating is wrong, or but in ORC, it probably means we need to remeasure something or look at something or change. We're obviously rated for something that we're not necessarily using effectively. So, I think that's a useful exercise to go through, is to kind of get those, print a quick target sheet if you don't have a more advanced instrument system that allows you to kind of input that and monitor that actively. You can just, get a simple upwind target sheet. And I think you even get that if you buy the speed guide, you get some basic target sheets. So, those are really easy to understand that, it's blowing a certain wind speed, we're going upwind, we should be going the speed at this angle. So those are kind of fringe benefits of having a certificate and in the rule. 2026 VPP is open. You'll see in some of these later slides that I've done some looking at current active certificates, and a bunch of people in BC don't have certificates yet, but I think the VPP just opened a week ago, 2 weeks ago, maybe. And what I should say is that the VPP is the Velocity Prediction Program. So each year, ORC reviews all the results. They have a technical committee which kind of look at which boats were successful, why, have they found a way to exploit what's happening with how ORC sees the boat, and basically, is a boat significantly outperforming its polars that the rule predicts it should have. And there was quite a notable incident with this with the new XR41 last year. And so that actually did delay this year's VPP being released a little bit. So it's just come out. And that basically means that you can now run and get your 2026 certificate and do test certificates with the current rule to see, what your rating will be this year in ORC. And a recent change this year is that the ORC application process and kind of information hosting in Canada has fallen under the BC Sailing umbrella now. So you go to the BC Sailing website to access that and apply for a new certificate or renew, because we're the largest ORC fleet in Canada by a significant margin. So, yeah.
Okay, good stuff, Stuart. And we've been talking earlier to tell people about the spreadsheets and sort of demystify the ORC system and make it a little bit more engaging for everyone racing out there. Do you want to walk us through this?
Yeah, so I'll try and be quick here. So basically, this is you go to the ORC website, and there's a big button that says Sailor Services. You need to create an account if you haven't had a certificate or had an account previously. You don't actually have to have a certificate to create an account. Anybody can go in and build an account, so you can have access to it. And basically, you go in there, and there's on the left, you can see there's search for certificates, and it brings you to this window. And that allows you to search for people or active or inactive ORC certificates by either the reference number on the certificate if you happen to already have it, yacht name, sail number, and yacht class is description such as J105 or Santa Cruz 50 or something like that. But that one I find is less helpful because whether they put a space or a slash or a hyphen in various things, you can not find what you are looking for. So once you've done that, you can, if you go to the next slide, it'll give you a list of boats. This is actually, sorry, I missed a step here, but if you search and you find the correct boat, you'll get a list very similar looking to this, but they'll have a checkbox on it that says add to scratch sheet. And you can go through and you can add boats that you're looking for to a scratch sheet. And then on the left, you can see below search for certificate and my boats, there's something called scratch sheet. So this is a quick one I built today, just looking through boats that were entered in the ORC Sisters course that had active 2026 certificates. They have to be an active certificate. And then you can see up at the top underneath where it says scratch sheet and above the pink box, it says scoring Canada. So if I select that, that gives all the options that are available for scoring in Canada. And then I picked a triple number all-purpose low time on time, which is something that could potentially be used at Southern Straits. And so if you select that and then you click the button that says create and display scratch sheet for the boats below, if you just go to the next slide, Alex, you get this, which is an interactive table. So if I was sailing on Ultraman 3, I could select Ultraman 3. And then what this would tell me that under this scoring metric, which is time on time, after 1 minute, I would owe Lodos 1.3 seconds and longboard would owe me 3.6 seconds. And then you can actually edit these times at the top, but you can go through and see how this would play out. So I typically will do these, select my boat, put in some relevant timestamps that I think might be relevant to how long our race is going to be. And then what you can do is you can print this off and have it on board. And it's kind of, I find it a great tool because I find a lot of times when I go and sail on boats when we're sailing on ORC, people don't really have people have a pretty good foundation of a boat's PHRF rating and kind of where they should be on the course relative to them. But I feel like when we go to ORC, a lot of people don't. So you can kind of do a couple of these with a couple different scoring options, and they're quick to create and print out. And then you can kind of say, okay, well, it's been kind of medium, and we've kind of gone upwind or downwind, and so this is what we think that the race committee would likely score this race at. And you can look at it and you can say, okay, well, I think we're definitely 10 minutes ahead of those guys, or we're 5 minutes behind those guys. And you can kind of look at your scratch sheet and say, yeah, I think we're like in touch, or we're doing really good, or like, oh, we have some work to do. But I find when you do that and you can the crew can kind of share in that, it helps people really stay engaged, especially in a race like Straits, it's long and cold. And it can have a significant improvement in people's engagement and understanding of what's going on, which, if the whole crew is engaged and has a better concept of what's going on and how you're doing, unless you're doing really badly, maybe you don't want to tell them, it tends to drive more engagement, and an engaged boat is typically a fast boat. So, that's kind of another tool that's buried in there, and I don't think it's super well understood. And as a great way to help you understand the differences in the rule and where you stand in your division.
Great stuff. And
Hey, I got a quick question. Do you guys hear me okay?
Yep, you're fine, Pete.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for this, guys. Appreciate it. We just got our official finished 2026 ORC cert today, so we'll get on that list there. But talking with some guys around too, we have a date for March 29th to look at getting our boats measured for ORCI, so international.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering, like, what is the benefit for us, our local fleets, to get that ORCI? There's a lot of work to do that, but I'm hearing that it's a more beneficial thing to do. But I thought maybe this is a good forum to kind of just review that.
Well, I can tell you, in a Vic Malley race, it cost me a whole placing when I got my international certificate and reran the race based on my international certificate versus my club certificate, and how that changed. So it can be a significant difference depending on the assumptions that the rule has made against you. And if you're at J120, there's a pretty wide range of displacements in the database. And so when you go in with club, it just assumes pretty much that you're the lightest boat, and it's unlikely that you're the lightest boat. So, and then in a one-off boat, especially like Pete, you've got you've had some work done on your mast. It's not necessarily, it's making assumptions that you have a light, high-tech carbon mast. And, I bet you when you measure it, the weight of your mast and the balance point comes down, and that's going to negatively affect how the rule sees how stable you are, and that's going to improve your rating. If you want to have a concept of how sensitive ORC is to stability, go and play with your crew weight. It's very easy and cheap and easy to understand. If you remove a couple hundred kilos from your crew weight on your ORC certificate, how your rating changes. And it's not insignificant. It's the rule is definitely sensitive to stability, and so, making sure you're measured correctly and the rule is interpreting how stable and where the center of gravity, et cetera, is will, greatly affect the result of the output of the certificate. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I probably should have weighed my mast while it was out, but I appreciate it.
Been in that exact same spot, so we can commiserate on that later.
Great. Thanks a lot, guys. I really appreciate this. Thank you.
All right. And do you want to quickly touch base on a PHRF here?
So PHRF, we actually in BC, we use one of the more, BC and Northwest are probably one of the more shall I say, advanced PHRF um, organizations in North America. And so, we have what we call code bands, which are basically differentials from what the rule considers as standard sale areas. And those are done in 3-second increments. So they're fairly large. ORC, when you measure sales for ORC, it's taking every measurement, calculating a real sale area, and then incrementally by many many decimal places adjusting the rating. PHRF is a bit more gross tune versus fine tune, so it essentially you can have the key things in PHRF is to not be what we call at the bottom of a code band. So you can have a Genoa that is 2 inches or 3 inches too big in one dimension, and that costs you 3 seconds per mile, which on a 100-mile course is not an insignificant amount. So there's some basic just remeasuring and checking that you're kind of in the code bands. There can be some free money on the table there, and it's not like if you're it's unlikely that if a sale fits into a code band well, so i.e. it's at the top of one of these code bands. And so what I mean by code band is basically, let's say you have a Genoa and it'll rate the same from 540 square feet to 525 square feet. So there's like in that size of sale, there's like a 15 to 20 square foot difference in the actual sale area, but those are treated exactly the same under rating. There's no difference in how they're treated in rating. So if you can have a 540 square foot, ideally you want to have a 539.9 square foot sale. It's unlikely that it'll shrink and ever shrink enough that it'll drop you another code band. So in PHRF, not worth to kind of remeasure. In ORC, it's worth to remeasure annually, every other year kind of thing for upwind sales, because they're kind of sales are actually generally shrinking versus stretching, common to not as most people think. And so that can drive a slight improvement in rating. But yeah, so in PHRF, the big thing to look at is just look at your certificate. On the bottom, it'll say like main, jib, spinnaker. There'll be a code. 5 is basically what we call normal. Smaller than 5 is what we call a credit. So you get up 3, 6, 9 seconds credit back, and you can have a penalty, which is 6, 7, 8 codes and higher on certain sales, and those are assessed in 3-second increments. So you can look at that, and if you're all 555, it's pretty easy. They give you, for your rig dimensions, they give you a standard sale area and an as sailed sale area. So if those numbers are relatively close to each other and you're code 555, there's probably not a lot to do. If there's something that's a big number in either direction, it's worth looking at and asking your local handicapper if they can kind of run the numbers and tell you if you're close on any of your code bands.
Great stuff, Stuart. And Ross, do you have anything to add to overview of ORC and PHRF systems and how you use it to your advantage, or maybe how it helps you to make decisions on the course, or how you build your race around it?
No, I think Stuart's touched on pretty much everything, and and I think just in general, it never hurts to, if you ever have your sails out for service, just to quickly run over the measurements again, so when you do go reapply, even if it's PHRF, not just ORC, just so you have a pretty good idea about where you are in relation to those bands. And so, if you're making the decision for a recut or to buy a new sail, you kind of know what you're going to get is not as just a new sail, but how much bigger it'll be or how much smaller you want to make it to get into another code. So it's always good to do. It only takes a minute or two to take a few measurements and get that nailed down.
Yeah, awesome. Awesome. And just to summarize this section, guys, apply for your ORC and PHRF certs all our handicappers are doing a lot of work for us, and maybe it's a good time to get it done in advance to make sure you're not pushing any deadlines. Remeasure your old sales, always good excuse to check over the sale and pin down all your numbers for certificate. And if you have to optimize sale for PHRF, your SailMaker can help out with that and also show you where you are in relation to that band. In terms of measurement, here's a quick slide just to explain what measurements we are looking uh, for the most part in terms of girths, loft lengths, and so on. This is all public information. You can find it on ORC website. Those measurements, they correlate pretty well between ORC and PHRF, and it doesn't change much. If you got all the measurements for ORC, you can freely apply for your PHRF certificate. And after all the discussion about the rating systems, we're going to lead to the sales selection and sales on your boat and how you might want to build this strategy heading into the race. Stuart or Ross, would you like to take one of these slides and go over it?
Sure.
Well, I think people want to hear from Ross. They've heard enough from me.
No, I think the Straits in general has been more or less an upwind downwind race just because of the way the geography works. But in the middle course this year, with going between Entrance Island and White Islets, there is a good chance of doing some reaching. So if your boat, doesn't do a lot of reaching and you're not really sure if you're set up for reaching, it's a good time to think about, and you're doing that course. It's a good time to think about where you'd lead things on the outboard rail and short sheets and change sheets and that sort of thing if the wind does shift and you have to go back to a downwind sail or an upwind sail. So, I would put, my effort into making sure the boat's competitive upwind mainly. And because that seems to be where, most of the gains and losses are because we get so spread out on the course between people going left and people going right and just making sure that your boat's optimized for going upwind and whether it's the southeasterly coming back home or it's the westerly going up there, it's always good to make sure that you've got that part covered. Downwind, I think if it is a straight run, having a good downwind sail is important, but it's not the end of the world. Probably what's more important is that the integrity of the sails are good, that if you're running in 10 knots of wind and, as the night goes on, it starts blowing 20 plus, that, you're not caught out needing to peel because the sail's blown out. So making sure everything's in good order and there's no unseen holes or rips in it, which we'll get into in a minute, is key. And especially as day becomes night, if make sure you inspect everything prior to the lights going out. So if something does need attention, you can sort it out prior to it getting dark. And it's because if you need to run with that sail in the night, it's a lot easier to sort it out then. So, and generally for me, that's not where my focus is, but it is a good time sort of in the dusk period to have a good look around at everything, look up at the top of the mast, make sure everything's in order, the halyards are on the correct side of where they need to be, and just make sure everything's ready for nighttime sailing.
Yeah, I've found that like most of the smartwatches now, you can set like a alarm. Like on my Garmin, I have an alarm that goes off 1 hour before sunset, and that's always just my like check in. Like, hey, it's going to be dark in an hour, so let's start moving towards being ready for dark. And that way, because it can creep up on you with our long twilights here, darkness.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, it's the facial hair growing, but a smartwatch might be easier.
Okay, no, it's good stuff, guys. And all this discussion with the sales selection, we've got nice sail selection charts that you can get from your sail makers. It is going to represent what you have or don't have in your inventory. Ross, if you step to race on a boat for the first time and you got this chart, what is your main attention? What are you looking for, and how do you read the chart, and what benefits you can get from it?
Well, first is the upwind crossovers, and how hard are the crossovers? Do the sails overlap fairly well? So, when we're getting near the top of a range, are we panicked about changing to a new sail, or if we think the wind is going to come down in 10, 15 minutes, can we hold on to what we've got? Which normally in that case, it's more of a shape thing versus a size thing. So if the size of the sails between the number one and the number two are fairly similar, then you might think about just holding off on a sail change if you think the wind is going to trend back to the way it was. The other thing I would think about as well is how far each of the sails can go across the wind range, I guess, or wind angle range is what I'm trying to say. So if it does turn into a bit of a reach, at what point do we need to switch to either a kite or a code sail or something in between? So and those are very, very handy, I find. And even if it means you're manipulating your course a little bit, i.e., you have to bear off 5 or 10 degrees to get a bigger code sail up or even a downwind sail, how much is it going to cost us? So and so they're very handy. And I think, a lot of these crossovers are boat specific, obviously. Each sail on each boat has a different sort of crossover and wind range. So it's really up to each boat to have a pretty good idea about what they consider to be, their own specific crossover charts. And it's only by experience that you can sort of manipulate these charts to your own. So if, like you say, if I was joining a boat, yeah, I would probably, go with that chart that the boat had, if they had a chart, and, to the T, and knowing that they've got much more experience with those sails than I do. So, yeah, they're very handy. And I always think that a boat should have that, maybe alongside, posted inside the boat or even on the bulkhead outside. It just gets everyone thinking about it, way back in the previous century when we did it around the world race, we had actually had it right next to our safety diagram. So at least when you're eating your meal or having a cup of coffee, you're thinking about the sail crossovers. And so it just became a little bit more automatic as the day went on, knowing when you should think about switching to sail.
Perfect.
Yeah. You kind of consider these to be like a living document versus like a Bible, right? Like they're always kind of evolving, changing, and like sometimes you figure something out, like, oh, if we use this sail on an outboard lead, we can actually sail in more wind and deeper with it than we thought too, right? I think like it's interesting too because like this particular format allows you to add things like the reefs and the mainsail, right? And I'd be curious to know when this chart is from because it's like on this boat, it's a little, there's some interesting stuff going on, right? Like we're going from the one to the number two, and then we're reefing before we put up the number three, right? We're reefing with the number two up still, and then we're putting the second reef in not very far into the number three range, right? And then we're basically with the second reef all the way through the rest of the range. The other thing that's interesting about this to me is that the reef lines diverge um, to the right, which means that essentially what they're saying is they're reefing later, like i.e. in more wind when they are sailing lower. So as they start reaching, they're holding on to the full main longer, which is inverse to an experience that I've had in a lot of boats where actually you want, the full main when you're trying to go upwind, because it allows you to kind of sail upwind and feather, and you can really kind of, it helps you point. But once you start reaching, if you're really having to fight the main, it often has a lot of drag. And so, a bunch of boats that I've sailed, you actually, like on the Santa Cruz 70, we found if we did a lot of reaching testing that like we carried the full main up until 25 true upwind when we were trying to go upwind. But in 16 or 17 knots of breeze, we would be with a staysail, a reef, and jib top reaching. So, these are interesting, like they're interesting to analyze. And this might be totally true for a J120. I haven't really sailed them that much, but there's insights to be gained from looking at these.
Mhm.
Perfect. Yeah, and if you guys don't have this chart, but you know your boat well, it's always a good idea to share it with your crew just so everyone understands what ranges you're up to. Again, if you don't have the chart, make your own chart, make the ranges, and that's gonna set you up quite well. And now we're going from the sales that you need and sales that work for you well. We're gonna go to the sales that you actually supposed to have, and Stuart is gonna walk us through the OSR3 sales here and requirements that we are going to live with
Yeah.
for this year.
Yeah. Yeah. So category 3. So there's the world sailing classification for category 3. According to world sailing for category 3, you're actually required to have a storm trysail. That can be an expensive and challenging thing to rig depending on how your rig is set up. Like, so carbon rigs that don't typically have second tracks or are hard to mount a second track, require some rationalization around, are we going to take all the cars out or the main completely out of the left track and feed it into the bolt rope track? And how hard is that going to be in the conditions that we actually want to use the thing? Benefits of the storm trestle, obviously it works with a broken boom. But under the rules that we're actually sailing in for Southern Straits, Swiftsure paid us this year, so that BC basically got together and modified category 3 for our local scene. These sails have been moved to recommended. So majority of boats won't have them for this. And honestly, if you're at the point where you need a trysail in Southern Straits, it's probably just time to go home. A sail that I think is a really important sail, and there's a high probability of needing it at some point. Southern Straits is a heavy weather jib. On most boats, this is typically the number 4 jib. This, unlike a storm trysail or a storm jib, which has a few additional requirements on as far as what materials it's allowed to be made of. It's not allowed to have battens, etc. Heavy weather jib is still pretty unlimited. Like, you can build it out of anything you want. There's no requirement for it as far as color. Basically, the only things that are controlled in it are if you're using it on a foil, so it's got a beaded luff tape, and it's either going into like a furler type foil or a tough luff Schaefer Harkin carbo foil type foil. You need to have what's called an alternate luff groove attachment. So you typically see that as a series of grommets directly behind the secondary luff tape, and that allows you to put small spectra ties, soft shackles, etc., either around the foil or furler if it's damaged, to continue to use the sail. And then there's some requirements around size. I would say on most boats, if you build the heavy weather jib to maximum size and you have a good full size blade, your heavy weather jib is normally kind of too close to your blade in size. It's normally a little too big. So a lot of boats, the blade number 3 jib is actually surprisingly close to being in the size range of the heavy weather jib. So that's an interesting thing to play with. And I think having a nice, not such a big step that the sail isn't going to be used until it's blowing 40, but a step that allows it to have some crossover with the number 3, but is still a significant step down in size from the number 3 is a useful thing to do for size. And I think in my experience, as things have trended on, I'm a big fan of shortening the luff more and leaving some more foot length on the sail, because typically when you're sailing with these things, it's pretty big sea state. And so some foot length really lets you still have a little bit of shape or camber in the sail, even if it's quite windy, to get through sea state, but not having the area up high doesn't tip the boat over as much. And typically that kind of slightly less high aspect shape is a bit more forgiving trim position, et cetera. And on most boats, when we get to the number 4, you know, a lot of people are struggling with really trimming the thing really, really well, or you're even on pin stop leads versus adjustable cars or floating leads at that point, just based on how the deck layout is. So, you know, having a sail that's like a little less critical to having a lead exactly right could be beneficial in those conditions, you know, not having to put someone down the leeward side when it's blowing 30 and it's dark and, you know, you just put the sail up, right? So.
Perfect. And here's a slide that we're from BC Sailing saying that it's been changed to recommended. So you guys know that we're not lying to you here. And here's a few OSR progressions from this year that Stuart, I guess you wanted to touch base on as well.
Sure, yeah, I'll just very quickly. So this is actually from 2025. So this relates specifically to storm jibs. So at the end of 2025, sorry, the end of 2024, World Sailing came out and said, we are aware that people are building storm jibs that are orange and that are the correct size, but they are not being appropriately built for, you know, the use as storm jibs. And a lot of them are being put onto boats as various reaching staysails and, you know, are kind of too full, too lightly built, and, you know, not really attached to hardware that's intended, you know, use on the boat when it's blowing, you know, 30, 35 plus. So they came out with this amendment, which basically stated a little bit in more plain language, you know, some more detail on material controls, and that, you know, point F is kind of the primary change that came with this, which is that the primary purpose of a storm jib is to provide propulsion and steerage in storm and heavy weather conditions. And it has to be built like that. And so that happened in fall of 2024 for the 2025 year. And basically, people didn't really abide by it. And so they did another update this fall for this year, which says, where is the change? Point G is the new change. So the storm jib may not be set in conjunction with any other sail forward of the mast bar. So basically, if the storm jib is up, nothing else can be up as far as like other than a main or a storm trysail. So nothing forward of the mast. So it's specifically geared at things like this. So this is about doing a triple-headed speed run down in PVIs last year. And they've got, you know, clearly they're not in storm conditions. And they've got the, you know, storm jib up, which they're really using as an inner staysail to maximize their reaching helm balance and sail area and slot effect. And so this year, this is now illegal. You can still have a sail that is the shape and size and everything of that orange jib, and it could actually still be orange. There's no saying that you can't have more than one orange sail. But if this is declared as your storm jib and there's not a separate proper storm jib carried on the boat, you know, it cannot be set like this. So basically, whatever sail that it is your storm jib is being declared as your storm jib, you know, is meeting your qualifications for your storm jib. You can't have it up with other sails forward of the mast. So that's not really a big deal for our local area, but it's an interesting development in how world sailing kind of pays attention to what people are doing and, you know, adjusts the rules as we go through the years to kind of try and regulate and keep the sport, you know, kind of fair and safe.
Yeah, so if you were planning to reach back home triple-headed with a storm jib up, unfortunately, it's a no-go there this year, guys. Yeah, and here's some examples of storm sails. This particular example is on the boat with a in-mast furling mainsail, so there are ways to make it work if you really want to. Reach out to your local riggers for proper support. They can help you out with that. And we're gonna go a little bit quicker here, guys, because we're exceeding our target time here. Just to make sure that you got your storm sails and all the OSR sails in order and you're ready to present it in case you're being pulled out for the inspection. And it's always a good thing to have because a lot of things may happen in the ocean and something may go wrong. And sometimes it's really good to have those. And we always hoping not to use them, but things happen. Here's some examples. So a storm jibs up. This storm jib is a little bit outdated from the past. Is why it's made in white color and got nice pennant up top to make sure that the highlight is not deflecting too much, not damaging the foil and not bashing on the rig. And event organizer asks us to touch base on the riffing. We have a lot of participants this year that are new to the race and they're new to sailing. I know a lot of you guys here are experienced, but we're going to briefly touch base on the riffing because riffing, it's where you can definitely have a lot of gains made and you can lose a lot of distance. But once you nail down the process pretty well, it's a very useful boat handling maneuver to have in your toolbox. And when you come down to riffing, it's pretty important to have the process depending on what boat you have. Uh, Especially for some boats, they have hydraulic vangs that gonna hold your boom up or not. Some boats may have a topping lift, other boats don't. So once you start riffing, be sure that you have something that's going to support the boom, either a vang topping lift, or if it's a racing boat, you in some instances you may use your spinnaker hyler just to hold the boom up temporarily so it doesn't fall down in the cockpit or nobody's holding it. Um, it's always helpful to have some marks and understand how deep your reef is and how far down you gotta go. You may have marks on your main highlight. You might have marks on the mast, which is super handy to have a few marks up the rig, maybe with a reflective tape or glow fast tape, so you can use it a bit more efficient at night. Just understand how far back you gotta hoist your mainsail after you attach the tack of the sail. Just makes it a little bit easier to come back to your default setting and keep sailing fast. A few rules that we're gonna touch base here on is first thing, after you lower down the main and you attach the tack, luff is being tightened first before the leech. After that, you want to tighten up your leech and make sure that your boom vang is off, so you're not fighting the boom vang or nor you're fighting a main sheet when you are tensioning the leech. And on a lot of boats, reef lines are being looped around the boom, and you have a loop that sort of slides on the boom back and forth, and you want to make sure that that's positioned in a way that it's going to pull reef line back, not forward, and is going to act in a way as an out hole. So that's a good thing to keep in mind when you're doing it. Normally, when you're reefing, it's probably getting quite windy, and you want to have an understanding where it needs to be roughly. So you may want to get out there early and practice a little bit. And yeah, just practice. Practice makes it perfect. And riffing is a pretty easy tool to balance the boat. And once you pin it down, it helps you with the transitions, especially when you're going between different sails. You might be going through some fronts that come in for 15, 20 minutes and it's eases off. So you might put a quick riff in and shake it off later. And timing of those is pretty essential and is going to keep your boat balance. You might have a different textile attachments. On this picture, we see the one with a horn style and a floppy rings at the front. And on the next slide, we put a picture where you might set up something nice with a snap shackle and a carabiner. You just lower down, make sure you lower down and put it on your Tilasca or some other form of a shackle for a quick attachment and release. Make sure your offsets set up right in terms of luff being parallel to the mast so it doesn't pull it in any weird angle, doesn't deflect the shape of the sail too much. And that's probably essential rules on riffing. And we're going to be quickly going here through the checklists on the sales. And you guys feel free to pop by either in our Vancouver facility or Victoria, and our guys on the loft floor are going to help you to go through it. But if you don't have time and you want to do it yourself, here's a quick list what you are looking for the most part, unless you got a really massive hole in the mainsail. Um, Check over the bolt ropes. That's where a lot of fails happen, and it's pretty easy to miss this one. And then you're 5 minutes before the start trying to feed the sail in the feeder, and the loft tape is fraying, and you're hustling with it. Sail slides. Either it's a track system you already have in place, or it's a slides that goes through grommet on the sail, or webbed on, or any other form of attachment. Batten systems, check your batten pockets. That's very crucial things, and you don't want to lose a batten going halfway up the beat to the sister's island or entrance island. Sailing with no battens is not fast by any means. Reinforcements and patches, spreader patches are quite important, especially on the reefing areas. They come in handy when you're sailing in a higher breeze. Make sure you have sets for those for first reef and a second reef. Maybe do it on a quiet day and see where the points of high contact are. You may go up the rig and mark them, or you can just do it by estimating those areas and oversizing the patch and so on. And a sail shape adjustment, making sure that if your sail is properly fitted, that everything is good, that it's not out of shape. And if you have some loft adjustments that need to happen, feel free to bring it to us. We can adjust the loft curves if needed and give your sail new life, because small adjustments, they come a long way. And sometimes you don't need necessarily buy a full new sail. You may just keep your old one going to keep it in a reasonable shape for the race. The same things for the head sails here. Check over the loft tapes. They're in good condition. They did not turn off. Spreader and stanchion patches, which is spreader patches mostly for overlapping genoas. And those patches, they tend to shrink because most of the time they're made out of Kevlar. And as the sail shrinks, the patches get also offset in relation to the rig and to the spreaders. Leech and foot lines, that's the next thing here. You don't want to end up halfway up the beat with a leech line or cleat that is not holding the line in place, and you have a sail that is flopping out there like a helicopter making a crazy sound. And also put the whole sail plan in the situation where it's not balanced properly. And the same thing for the balance systems here. Spinnakers. Spinnakers are pretty easy to check over. You may do it in the park. You can do it in your garage if you like to. Check over the stitching, that stitching is still in place, and you can just use your crew member to help you out. You can just lift the sail up in the air, make sure it's filled up with some air and it's somewhat floating in the air, and you can check over for a quick holes in the sail. Some quick adjustments on a loft and leech cords just to make sure that they're not too tight or too loose, and keep the sail in a reasonable shape. And talk to your sailmaker if you need to use tapes. You can bring it over to us, and if you have guys some data that support what is wrong with the sail or how it's behaving, some videos sometimes very helpful for us to determine what we can do to make your sail perform better out there. And
Yeah,
here's
that
some
just very quickly for those who don't understand about the easing tapes. That's actually removing the edge tapes and sewing them back on, because what's happening is the sail's typically stretching and the tapes are not stretching as quickly as the sail. And the number one symptom to watch for on that is if you kind of tend to ease the sail out and it gets to a point where it starts to curl, but then it, kind of suddenly collapse over itself. And it takes a lot of sheeting to get it back. That's a real common thing that, if you ease the tapes, all of a sudden the sail gets that kind of nice behavior back where it will carry some curl without kind of the big sudden collapse. So that's kind of what that means and what to look out for there.
Perfect. Great stuff, Stuart. And here is some example of chafing on the sails. That's why those patches are coming handy. Inspect for that. There's some pictures of bolt rope failures near the batten pockets, chafes on the batten pockets itself, where the batten is in a contact with the shroud. Torn reinforcement points near the reefs, small scratches in the kites, which is seem like a not big at the moment, but always have a possibility to escalate to something bigger that is not going to play in your favor. And it's always a good idea to have a repair kit on the boat. I know that you're not going to do full-on repair, only minor things that gonna keep you going through the race. But before you do anything, check over your sail, have a look at the corners, rings, headboards, battens, pockets, and uh, feel free to contact to us. And if we know what to look for in your sale, is going to help us to get it done quicker for you and get you up sailing again. And small repair kit on the boat is always handy thing to have with some cut repair tape, maybe some insignia, Cuban if you still have it somewhere in the secret stash, or Kevlar patches just to get through the race. Keep it in a dry bag with good pair of scissors, not a rusty pair of scissors that have been built in your bilge for years that you can't use to cut anything, and maybe have a palm and a few fresh needles and some thread just in case if you need to do a small repair.
Another top tip for your repair kit is keep those silica gel packs that come in basically everything you buy. And like if you throw a few of those in the dry bag, they actually help keep the PSAs and stuff on the glues in better shape on the repair kit.
Perfect, guys. We're slightly over the target here on our presentations. Sorry for being late and keeping you guys here a little bit longer, but we may probably do a quick 5-minute Q&A real quick. Yeah, I'm not sure if we got any questions in the chat or someone would like to address anything. Okay, well,
I got a quick question with the number 4 and the grommets. If we put the grommets in the number 4,
Yeah.
should we have our, soft shackles mounted in there already? Is that like a requirement at all, or like a good tactic to do? I mean, it's obviously not fast, but
Yeah, so you don't have to have them in there. I would say have the appropriate number that are the right size, like in a ditty bag that's like in the nav station, or even, sew another pocket into the sail bag and have them available. We went through that on smoke this year off the west coast of the island where the foil blew up. And we're trying to get the J4 set up, and yeah, it was rounding up every little tiny bit of string on the boat and cutting ties, and then giving the snorkel to the young bowman to go up there and tie 14 pieces of Dyneema around the headstay. So he would have been a lot happier if we'd had a bag of soft shackles that we could have sent him up there with.
yeah, I guess if you're going out into that conditions too, you could prep it too or something. But yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah,
cool.
I mean, I would say if you are genuinely going to use a number 4 and you have a like plastic type headstay foil, I would strongly recommend putting a soft shackle at least through the either top grommet or the head of the sail or the shackle of the halyard. Because if you can if you can prevent the peel from starting, generally you can keep it in there. But the problem is, once they go, and then you peel a couple sails out and the foils are never the same again too, right? So if you can prevent that happening, that's kind of a good thing.
Yeah, cool. Good notes. Thanks, guys. This has been really good. I really appreciate the time and the hard work put into it. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Pete.
okay. Perfect, guys. All right, if we have no more questions, I guess we're gonna wrap it up. And if you guys have any questions that doesn't come to mind right now, feel free to reach out to us anytime. We're always here. We're always ready to help, and we'll see you all out there on the Easter weekend.
Yeah. Can't think of any other way. I'd rather spend Easter.
Tell that to the wife and kids.
Thanks,
Okay.
All right,
everyone.
thanks, guys.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you, everyone.